Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from the United Arab Emirates,
أرجو أن ترحب
Defterios.
Good morning, everyone, and a great pleasure to be back into Egypt and, of course, here in Sharm el-Sheikh. I'll keep my remarks rather short if we can have those take the seat for our special next guest. We had a chance to listen from His Excellency Prime Minister Medleb this morning and his cabinet about the road forward for the next 5 years in terms of investment laws and tax policy and the ability and the structure to attract foreign direct investment. We heard from two of the three major donors in the region for the last 18 months, the Finance Minister of Saudi Arabia, His Excellency Mr. Al-Saf, and Sultan Al-Jaber, of course, the Minister of State from the UAE, concluding those remarks. We often talked about a Marshall Fund for those countries of the Arab Spring. What has in fact happened is a Marshall Fund of type done by the Gulf states, $23 billion over 18 months, and we saw in the last 12 hours an additional commitment going forward. But the trick going from this point forward is bringing in the private sector that wants to invest in an economy of 90 million consumers. Between 2005 and 2010, it's often overlooked, but Egypt pulled in nearly $50 billion of foreign direct investment, and that fell dramatically between 2011 and 2013 to less than $8 billion. But what is the road forward for the private sector? What are they willing to do in an economy that's often called as a member of the next 11 that Goldman Sachs talked about a few years ago? Big population, great access to Europe, into the Middle East and into Africa, but getting the policies right to allow the private sector in. Let me welcome our first special guest, which I have a one-on-one interview with for 10 minutes, and then we have a superb panel to follow. Our guest really needs no introduction, but he chairs it and CEO of a company that has a market cap of just over $250 billion, more than 300,000 employees, and over $150 billion of revenues. Let's give a warm Sharm el-Sheikh welcome to Jeffrey Immelt, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of General Electric. Okay, this is a special treat to take a look at the road forward for Egypt. And Jeff, we have about 8 minutes, so I'll drill right in, if that's okay. Is that okay? First and foremost, and it's an interesting discussion to have, this is a market that faced the most incredible 4 years. The ouster of two presidents, one that was here for 3 decades, the other one was there for a year. It's a large economy of 90 million consumers, as I talked about, with great potential. But why wouldn't a GE basically just stay out with so much uncertainty? Why do you decide to come back in at this stage?
So the first thing I'd say, John, is for a global company like GE, we don't really study kind of short-term up and down. We look at things over a long term, and that's the context with which we would look at Egypt. We have a massive presence across North Africa into the Middle East. And in many ways, Egypt is a piece that belongs in that puzzle, right? So you never pick a perfect time, but when I look at, kind of, I would say, the engagement of the other countries in the region, the spirit on the ground, the willingness to tackle some of the challenges in infrastructure and regulation, this just seems like a good time to be in Egypt. And, John, we're not expecting perfect. We're not expecting like every day is perfect. But we think over the long-term investments we make here will pay off.
Investors, particularly large investors like GE, want stability. But privately, if you talk to Egyptian executives, they say they felt like democracy failed. We didn't let it play out in this country with such a large population. What is the trade-off? You prefer stability and not have the elections continue and have a much more strong hand in government that provides kind of daylight in the roadmap going forward?
I think those are kind of, I would say, political phrases. I think for a business person, what you want is infrastructure. You want training and education of people. you want development of small and medium enterprise, and you want regulatory reform. So I think we live in a volatile world in general, John. But I think, we tend to peer through all the things that are going on and basically look for those four things in the places we invest as being, you need to start seeing those change as time goes on. So if you're going to, we announced yesterday we're going to invest $200 million to build a factory in Egypt. If you can't at the same time, get electricity or get a trained workforce, those are more of the nitty-gritty problems to me than all of the macro items that are surrounding a country. We do business in so many countries around the world. Some are democracies, some are kingdoms, everywhere in between, right? And it's up to business to adjust to the world we live in, not the other way around.
Let's get a snapshot of the project. 2.6 gigawatts to bring online, providing about, a quarter of the energy needs of 2.5 million people. It's a big project. What's the timeline and the commitment in terms of investment?
So what I would say, John, is Africa in general has a 100 gigawatt deficit of electricity, and there's a tremendous need to get power online in this country. There's long-term plans to continue to invest over time, but we need to get power on the grid by May so that the country can have a summer that keeps the people, the Egyptians, and giving them the essential electricity they need. So, GE is a big company, John. We're a big company, and we have thousands of projects going on at any given point in time. Let me tell you, I know this one very well. I know how important it is to the Egyptian people, and we're not going to let you down. We need to execute on this project. So it's absolutely critical.
It sounds like a simple question, but why now to come back into Egypt in such a large scale with 2.6 gigawatts? This is a substantial infrastructure power project that you decided to go in at this stage when the region is incredibly insecure or uncertain at best.
It's what's incredible. If you look over the last decade, Africa and the Middle East, that region has been the fastest growing region throughout GE. So it's grown faster than any other part of the world. And that's been through disruption, wars. And the fact is that, we sell infrastructure, electricity, healthcare, aviation, locomotives, and that is massively needed in this part of the world. So, look, if you're a company that's named General Electric, you're welcome in Egypt right now. Now the trick is, how are we going to finance it? How are we going to execute on these projects? And I think all of us have to be willing to take some of our balance sheet and put that into the equation at the same time as just our technologies. So this is not just a technical battle. This is about getting the financing and things like that. And the other thing, John, and you know this well from being in the UAE, is the engagement of the region in Egypt, I think, is quite important for where Egypt is. In many ways, a company like GE, we've got great people that know how to do things or know the right processes. Typically, it's the CEO that says when you do something. And I think when I look at the world of GE, this just seems like the right time to be investing in Egypt.
You raise an interesting point. The commitment from the Gulf states. Thank you. You raise an interesting point. The commitment from the Gulf states is phenomenal. It's $23 billion over 18 months, committing to another 12. What has been absent so far, the international lenders and the G7.
Yeah.
Is it time for them to step up and play a bigger game here, a bigger role?
Look, I think the capital that comes together needs to be global capital and will be global capital. In other words, John, I look and say, if you take the power sector, which I know well. If you get decent power purchase agreements, if you get decent feed-in tariffs, if you can have consortiums of funding that might include the World Bank or UAE or Saudi Arabia. Look, when I read the Financial Times every day, it talks about negative interest rates in Europe. It seems like you can take that capital and actually put it to work in a region like this. So I think what's really required are financing schemes that are bankable, But then we should all be here. We need everybody. We need companies to invest. We need American and European banks to invest. We need the World Bank. But I think if we're all in it together, you can bring the right consortiums together to do things like build power projects and things like that.
Needless to say, a huge issue here is Iran right now. And a lot of controversy within the Congress and the White House whether to proceed in these negotiations. From a businessman's standpoint, is it better to have Iran as part of the global architecture or have them outside? Verifiable in the architecture or outside? What do you prefer as the CEO of GE?
John, you always pull the, I'm a humble businessman here, so I know this guy well.
The humble businessman who runs a $250 billion company.
I let Secretary Kerry and President Obama speak for the country, really. But as you know, I'll go anywhere to sell a gas turbine. So I look forward to that as well.
Should it be better engagement than we're getting right now? There's a big dispute going on. How do you see it from the outside, though? Do you want to see this economy opened up?
Look, I think the more open engagement economically is always good. Look, I don't need to tell people in this room the equation. There are things like national security that are so critical, and you feel it in this region. I'm not really qualified to talk about that. There are a lot of people that are smarter about that than I am. And then there's job creation and innovation and economics. And somehow if we can bring, this great spirit of innovation, and we can bring that to places that need it, that makes the world a safer place ultimately. And look, I'm 32 years with GE. I've traveled the world 1,000 times. I see that every day. So I think the economic engagement that small businesses and big businesses can bring, that's part of the equation that any society needs. So other than that, I ain't getting myself in trouble.
Last pointed question here. You bleed almost GE after 30 years within the company. Discussions about you leaving GE. Let's clarify once and for all. You staying at the helm as chairman and chief executive officer?
I'm a young man. We live in a part of the world where the rulers are 70, 80 years old. I've got a long in the world like the Middle East. I'm just a young baby. So I don't know why I would ever want to do anything like that.
I think that clarifies it, right? Good. And if by chance you have to retire early from GE, I think that you've got a warm welcome here, right?
Exactly. This is great people.
Very good. Okay, nice warm round of applause for Jeffrey Immelt, who's going to stay with us. Come on over. Let me welcome the rest of our star-studded panel here to our discussion as Egypt as a gateway and hub. And you can take a nice break right now. No more questions on Iran. Let's welcome to the panel Suma Chakrabarti, the president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also known as the EBRD. A hometown favorite from Egypt, Mohamed El-Erian of Allianz. Keping, Vice Chairman and Chief Investment Officer for China Investment Corporation, China. Another person with a great deal of experience in this country of 90 million consumers, Polman, CEO of Unilever. And one other person, I think, who's back there who's got a fairly sizable project that he's planning for Egypt. I think he's still coming to join us. Mohamed Alabbar, the Chairman, Chief Executive Officer of Emaar. Where are you going? We know you have a large project, but you can't use a different door. Come on, welcome. Okay, thank you very much. Now, I know we have one panelist that has to leave us in about 15 minutes for a meeting with the Prime Minister. So is that Suma? Is that you?
I'm afraid so.
Okay, good. That's what I thought. So he's not going to be rude and duck out on us, but he is going to exit because he does have a bilateral meeting. So just wanted to forewarn you, and we'll get some questions to Suma first to to spark our debate. Welcome, gentlemen. Couldn't really have a better lineup for a discussion looking at this economy. I touched a little bit on this with Mr. Immelt about the size of the economy and the risks that are inherent right now. So Suma, since you've been in charge at the EBRD, you've talked about redirecting the EBRD from an institution that was focused on Central and Eastern Europe after the collapse of communism into North Africa to assist those countries of the Arab Spring. Which stage are you at specifically with regards to Egypt and funding and supporting projects like infrastructure that Jeff was talking about?
Well, we're 2.5 years into operating in Egypt, and we've had a very, very strong start. I'd say particularly in the last 6 to 9 months, since we've had more stability in the country as well. We've invested about 750 million euros already, 23 projects across a whole range of sectors. In the way Jeff described, power has been one of the main areas, but also municipal services and SME, finance and so on. Job creation being a fundamental part of what we want to do. The other good thing, though, is not just the past, but the pipeline for EBRD projects is so strong in Egypt. And it's strong because I think the government is doing the right things in terms of reforms that actually are attracting a lot of private investors, foreign and domestic, to partnering with EBRD. So we're feeling very, very positive about EBRD in Egypt.
Do you feel like you have a very clear roadmap? I had a discussion with the Deputy Finance Minister the other night, said we wanted to lay out a 5-year roadmap on tax policy and investment policy to provide clarity and cut through the red tape at this stage. Do you find it's a very clear line of sight that what can happen in the country for the next 5 years?
I think it's become much, much clearer, I think, in the last few months. I think the new investment laws have made a major difference to us and to others. I think also the political and economic and social narratives are joining up, and that's quite important in terms of selling change, because obviously a lot of people worry about change. And I think the government has done a very good job, actually, of shaping a new narrative that people can buy into. Because change is painful as well. People who get energy subsidies don't get energy subsidies anymore. That's a big, courageous move for any government, but it sets the tone for the way they want to proceed over the next 5 years.
Good. We have a couple of that have to exit a little bit early. We had a later start than we expected. Mr. Alabbar, I'd like to turn to you and talk about your project here. I didn't realize you're going to break ground so quickly. So let's cover the new project. Then I want to talk to you about your previous investments into Egypt as well. Capital Cairo, is it going to look at all like what you did in downtown Dubai? Many people didn't think that you could build a large tower like that and attract a footfall, if my numbers are correct, about 80 million a year, and you're marching to 100 million. Give us a sense that why you wanted to bite off something so big and when you're going to actually break ground on the project.
Well, of course, I think those who understand the velocity of the Egyptian economy, and I'm glad you mentioned that earlier, I think you truly understand the size and the depth of this economy. And because I've been here 9 years, I operated, I understand the bureaucratic process, if you want to call it, I understand profit margins, I understand banking, So therefore, I think if you were to look at all the reviews where Egypt is going when it comes to size of economy, population base, I guess, it is on its way to be the most important 20 economy in the world. That is probably HSBC's recent report. And you look at the population base, what will happen to the population base in Cairo and in Egypt, that's also going really in a very interesting direction. Therefore, if you were to purely look, and you mentioned infrastructure, if you purely look at just a typical infrastructure need for Egypt, then you are in the right business. Now, I've seen it, I've gone through it, I know that very well. But you are right, why should you really go and bite something so big? I like to do big things. And I like to do big things in big place. So I like to do big things in big countries where I know the economy, I know the people, I know how eager the government to move forward. So therefore, it is in the right place, it is the right risk, it's the right administration. But even with all the analysis that we all go through, what do you feel like? Do you really feel like this is going to work? Because no matter what analysis we depend on, it's all an analysis. At the end of the day, you have to decide, are you going to bite this risk or not? And you know what? In Egypt, I'll bite any risk any day. So, I mean, you know, I have operation in 15 countries. GE has much more. But you know, it will take me 6 years in Canada or in America for me to get my building permit. In Egypt, 5 months. 5 months. So I'm saying, listen, if you know the Middle East, if you really want growth, if you want a great percentage of return, then this is the place. And in the Middle East, I think Egypt is the place. So all the fundamentals are right. Volume is right. Government is right. They're trying to do the right thing. And for us as businessmen, the numbers make sense. But are we emotional about it? Of course I'm emotional about Egypt. I'll be honest with you. Now, he speaks about downtown Dubai, where we've done this wonderful stuff, and Dubai is so successful. It's true. We got 80 million people last year. I think we'll probably go to 90 million this year. But when you look at the capital, honestly, affordability and will, all colors and type, and the diversity that you see in the Egyptian society, we want them to be there. And I promise you, affordability and the comfort and the diversity of income and culture of what will happen in that capital and that size, I promise you that's something that we're going to live by, and I promise that we're going to deliver it as well.
You know, you're setting that bar pretty high here.
Yes. That's how I live my life. I run a public company. People watch my number for the past 18 years every quarter. So you know what records I have. And I think in Egypt, I think it's going to be a workable thing. So I'm quite happy to take this on.
Let me follow up about your experience here before you said been on the ground for almost a decade. We saw, and I mentioned this to Jeff, probably the worst shock that any economy could take politically was so much upheaval that hit the region overall, but particularly hard on Egypt. Explain why you did not run for the hills, Mr. Alabbar. Why did you not pull out and you decided to stay? And what's been the return as a result of keeping the powder dry?
Well, it's very simple. I just believe, I lived 7 years in Singapore, and I always look at Indonesia, and I see that volume of population is something that's so exciting, and all my Chinese friends, Indonesia is the place. Of course, there is no rule of law, there is no democracy, there is corruption, call it whatever you want to say, with respect. But you've got 250 million people in Indonesia. They have to move on every single day. And when I look at, Egypt, you've got people who have to go to school every day, take their kids. You've got people who need health care. You've got people who have to go to work. So my philosophy during that period of time, first of all, I was watching my daily numbers. But the truth, we just, as a management, we decided that I don't think all Egyptians are going to get a Schengen visa, right? I don't think they can go to the U.S. Embassy and just leave the country. So there's a huge population. We know the market. So we bet that this thing is going to work. And you just can't go through against nature. So we continued construction during that period of time. I'm glad that our analysis was correct. But again, the present government came in, and they cleared up all the issues that we used to have during the past 2 years, and it turned out extremely well.
Good. Thanks a lot. Do you need to stay, or can you stay, or do you need to go?
Yeah, I'll have to go for the.
Okay, good.
For the
Thanks.
signing.
You got to run.
I'm so
nice to see you. Yeah, give me a warm welcome.
Thank you so much.
He was the last one to take the stage and the first one to leave. I'm not sure what that means for him. What was that all about? No, it was nice to have him. Very good, especially with a project of that sort of scale. I want to turn to the local rock star, Mohamed El-Erian. I tried to catch him in the hallway yesterday. And everybody wanted a piece of you, so I'm glad you made it to the podium at least, right?
So, John, I'm sitting here saying, I hope he doesn't come up to me after this. Please go to somebody else.
That's why I said you got to go to the local rock star. So, you've watched this economy very carefully. Obviously, you have Egyptian roots. Where are we going now, do you think? I mean, I was, in my coverage for CNN yesterday from here, I was saying it was almost a conference of defiance because we've had bombings for the last 2 weeks in pockets all around the country, great deal of uncertainty for 4 years, but it has the weight that people like in terms of 90 million consumers at the heart of the Middle East and trade agreements, access into the European Union, into the Gulf states, and into Africa. So it is a key turning point here for goods and services going out. Where do we go in terms of growth? The bar is to raise $60 billion in FDI between now and 2019, get growth up to 7%. Okay, that's a pretty high bar on both accounts. What do you think?
So I think Egypt is on a fundamental economic transformation voyage that will allow it to meet the aspiration of its people and will allow it to go up the ranks globally. And let me explain why. If you were to do a survey of the people sitting in this room, the thing that I think all of us are most confident about is Egypt's potential. Now, we can put it either negatively or positively. Negatively is that this is an economy that has chronically underperformed. But positively is that if you put the attributes of this country, the human talent, the physical capital, the links, the population, the availability of finance, if you put all that in an equation, the growth number that comes out should be a lot higher than what we've achieved. So I think all of us agree that the opportunity is huge, and we've heard this over and over again in the last 24 hours. Most of us also agree, and I certainly agree, that there's a fundamental change in the design of the economic policy approach. I've been observing Egypt for a long time, and it's really encouraging to see three things come together. First, a macro framework, a destination, so that people know where we're going and why. No one embarks on a journey without knowing what the destination is. The second element that's coming along, and we're going to hear a lot more about it, are sectoral programs. You heard Jeff on power, education, health, sanitation, infrastructure. And this is really important because they don't just meet economic requirements, they meet social objectives. And the third thing that's coming along is the enabling environment, the environment in which the private sector operates. We've heard about the investment law, we've heard about subsidy reforms, we've heard about the corporate tax thing. So it's very encouraging to see these three things together. So where are we less confident? We're less confident about implementation. The question on a lot of people's mind is, will it be implemented this time around? And if you look at how the government is approaching all this, you get a lot more confidence about implementation. And there's going to be a number of pivots that we will all need to observe. One is institutionalizing implementation, making it the DNA of the institutions that don't just serve a privileged few, but serve the population as a whole. Second is to make sure that we continue to get external support that extends beyond three very, very good friends in the Gulf. Third, supplementing mega project with lots and lots of small project in the medium, small size, and startups. And I'm really encouraged as to what's happening on startup. Then the thing we're least confident about, and I am most confident about, are the outcomes. Right? People say, well, if we do all this, will it really matter? And economic analysis is unambiguous. If we do all this, Egypt's economy will completely be transformed, and the beneficiaries are not just going to be this generation of Egyptians, but many generations that follow.
Good. Let me follow up with you very quickly. Thank you. It's a question I posed to Jeff Immelt as well. I remember the Duvel partnership that was announced by the G8 after the Arab Spring. Pledges of $20 billion, and we're going to step in and provide this sort of funding. And everybody kind of, if I can be really candid here, everybody stood back and waited for the trio that Mr. El-Erian is speaking about, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE, to fill that void. Isn't that a crying shame that the West didn't step in at the most critical time with the sort of support that they initially talked about for the Arab Spring countries? It wasn't anywhere near the initial pledges that were put on the table.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand why. When you have an economic sudden stop, think of someone having a heart attack. The system doesn't restore itself comprehensively immediately. It goes sequentially. And I think what you're seeing is a sequence established. The people who move in first are the people with the most information. And there's a reason why Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, and you heard it, they know this part of the world and they know Egypt extremely well. So you would expect them to be the first movers in a transformation story. The second movers has been the financial investors. Just look at what the stock market has done for the last 12 months, one of the best performing stock markets. The third are other countries, other businesses, right? And you see that. But the most important mover was actually what the Prime Minister said this morning, that within 8 days, the government was able to mobilize $64 billion from the average Egyptian for the Suez Canal. And that is a very strong signal to everybody else that's waiting on the sideline, and now it's going to come in.
I'm going to bring in Mr. Lee and Paul Polman, of course. Mr. Suma, you had a comment because you're active in this topic that I brought up.
And I think I completely agree with where Mohamed's coming from on this. I think the idea that public aid budgets in the West were going to be a big part of the story was always a wrong idea.
We just need the microphone for Sir Suma raised up, if we can, please.
This was at a time when many aid budgets in the West were under pressure anyway, but also they're too small, frankly, to do the job. So it has to be the private sector that comes in and international institutions. As Mohamed said, it's absolutely no surprise that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and UAE came in first. And I think that's great. And again, yesterday we heard another set of great contributions. But when I've pitched, essentially, to sovereign wealth funds and so on, they really see Egypt particularly, but this region, as a region with real potential. And we should be attracting them. I mean, the equity returns in Egypt last year were fantastic. And that is for a very good reason. I think the country is going in the right direction. We've also, in the case of EBRD, pitched in with 2 billion, of which 750 million euros came to Egypt in the last 2 years. And that is only going to get scaled up much more in the coming years. Because again, this region is now much more open for business in exactly the way Mohamed outlined.
Good. Let's bring in Mr. Lee and Mr. Polman. Very interesting, if I can start with Mr. Lee. I've covered quite carefully, of course, as emerging markets editor, the role of China in Africa and the African Renaissance. In fact, Jeff, you were at that conference, the U.S.-Africa conference last year, I think it was, correct? Yep. And it's almost a game of catch-up by the United States to China. Most people think of sub-Sahara Africa or Eastern Africa, where you're extremely active. What role are you going to play in Egypt going forward, and how does Egypt fit in strategically to the Chinese model of foreign policy at this stage? What's the priority?
Okay. Let me, from my perspective, to explain my view. Yeah, sure. Because I come from CIC. CIC is a China sovereign wealth fund. So our fund is very focused on long-term investment. It's a commercial investment. Okay, go back to your question. CIC is a global investor. But compared with the other global investor, we have relatively high weight allocation in emerging market. This is one characteristic of CIC. Second, compared with the other larger institutional investor, we have relatively high allocation in private infrastructure investment or direct investment. So therefore, we have to very focus on looking for opportunity for long term. Okay. Second, why we have relatively pay a lot of attention for emerging market? According to experience in China, we do believe there are a lot of emerging market. If this country have go to a right way, a right policy arrangement, that will have very high. They have very good, very high development potential, especially in the long term. So right now, I think this event, I don't need to talk about how important Egypt in the region. Yeah, because this event already showed us Egypt is very important in this region. So I think for us, this diversified investment is also very important. So far, we have only investment exposure in Egypt is in public market. It's a public equity. But we still have great interest in looking for more opportunity, more potential cooperation in long-term investment. For example, infrastructure or different infrastructure. We already see an ambitious plan submitted by government. Today and yesterday, we have heard and seen, I think that is a very good point for long-term investor to pay more attention, to do research, to set up partner relationship, then create more opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. Really clear, by the way, because I know he decided to speak in English, and I really appreciate that, Mr. Lee. Paul Polman, am I correct in saying it's at least 50 years for Unilever in Egypt? Am I right?
Well, we've been here a long time and will always be here. The business for us here is 4 factories, about 10,000 people directly and many more indirectly. And obviously, through good times, through bad times, we've continued to invest in the country. And as we talk now with the government, where the plans are a little bit clearer and more ambitious, we'll probably step that up even more so, not only for Egypt itself, but for export as well. We're one of the bigger exporters in consumer goods already from Egypt, and I don't see any reason why we could not continue to do that.
It's interesting, both with Mr. Alabbar, and I spoke to the Chief Executive Officer of Majid Al Futtaim, which has the Carrefour supermarket chain.
Right.
And I would love to hear the panel on this across the board. Please chime in. But let me start with Paul, because you're a consumer-facing group. Consumer spending, despite all the chaos that we've seen for the last 4 years, is high. Consumption is high. They don't hold back their spending. They want to live a good quality of life, despite what was going on in the region. And that sort of consumer spending is going to continue if the growth rate, of course, nudges between 5 to 7% over the next few years.
Well, you can't take it for granted, but if you look at the Prime Minister this morning and you look at his 10-point plan, which obviously is very ambitious, but you can only say that the people that are now in charge are incredibly capable people. The plan is a very focused plan, and if you can unlock that potential that is still here, there's an enormous opportunity to keep growing double-digit. I think the main presentation that was the most interesting to me this morning was the Sustainable Development Strategy, because the key challenge to unlocking Egypt, next to living the commitment also from the international community, is really to be sure that it's a very inclusive growth. And if we can unlock the bottom of the pyramid, if we can create the employment for especially the young population, women particularly, then there's a huge potential to keep growing double-digit for any company. We have a program right now in Egypt, for example, to train 2,000 women in our sales force, including the inclusive financing program with 7,000 smallholder farmers on tomatoes. So if we can continue to invest there and be sure that that growth is inclusive, you build that foundation, I think, for that long-term prosperity that we're all looking for.
One of the numbers that stood out in my research when I was taking a look at Egypt, and we know the scale and the size that you talked about there, Paul, was the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report. And I think it has Egypt about 118 out of 144 countries. Now, it had a better track record before the overthrow and the chaos. Do you look at these barometers and say, I'll make a decision whether I come in or come out based on, that's a very low ranking, obviously. This administration wants to cut through the bureaucracy, get permits, as Mr. Alabbar was talking about, through the system. But do you think it can be capable of much, much more?
You know, John, we do business like Unilever in 175 countries around the world. So there are worse places, I would say. A lot of it has to do with what's happened the last couple of years. But I go back to, for 2 years in the U.S., I led President Obama's Jobs and Competitiveness Council. We came up with 4 things that I've since seen every place I go, which is infrastructure, regulatory reform, training and education, and really nurturing small and medium enterprises. And I think that formula works in Egypt just like it works every place else. Now, I would echo what Paul said. So if we come here and when we build a factory, and let's say our first wave will hire 500 people, there's an 8-to-1 multiplier of those 500 people in the supply chain. So we'll create 4,000 jobs in SMEs. And I think one of the responsibilities companies like Unilever and GE have are really to stay focused on training our suppliers, investing in our suppliers, making sure that you have this great SME community. And that's how the competitive index starts getting better, right? You get more electricity, you get more trained people, that's how you grow.
Good. Mohamed, I would like to get your thoughts on this right now in terms of the ability to restructure the labor force, get the right training into place. There's no silver bullet to get there, of course, but can you accelerate this idea that the investment authority becomes a friendly shop in which to work in, and if GE or Unilever wants to expand and make things happen, or the EBRD wants to partner with the group, it can happen in a reasonable span of time?
I think it's not just it can happen, it is happening. I mean, just listen to what colleagues have said. There are two things that have fundamentally changed. One is you hear the word inclusive growth as part of the normal vocabulary. There's an understanding, a critical understanding, that growth, the benefits of growth should not just be high, but should be more fairly distributed. And this is really important in terms of economic issues. Too much inequality is bad economics. It's not just bad socially and politically, it's bad economics, right? So there's now an understanding that inclusive growth, and you heard it with the ministers. The two ministers this morning and the Prime Minister spoke about inclusive growth. And that's very important. And the second issue that's very important is corporate responsibility. Both of them mentioned this notion of corporate responsibility. I see it when I interact with the Egyptian companies. You see it in the startups. And that is helping a fundamental effort that's going on and that has really taken a massive leap forward, which is protecting the most vulnerable segments of society. The cash transfer program is empowering people enormously, right? And that was a dream for Egypt. It's happened, and it will continue to happen. So the answer is absolutely. We have so much to gain from simply better utilizing existing talents, and then we have even more to gain from developing our talent further through education, through training. So, you know, the potential actual and what you could actually do with the potential is really significant.
Good. I want to ask the panel here a question, and then we can maybe take a question or two from the floor. This is a region in massive chaos right now. I'm living in Abu Dhabi. I feel like I'm living in this kind of buffer zone here of tranquility. But uncertainty in Iraq, uncertainty in Syria, Libya in chaos, transitions in the Arab Spring economies right now. As you plan ahead, Paul, I mean, how do you manage this? I mean, how do you tell your board, we're going to stay in, we're going to continue to invest, and this is an important region to make sure it stabilizes?
Well, as Jeff is saying, we're in 190 countries, so we see a lot of it, and we are in many of the other countries that unfortunately are even more unstable. But you have to believe in one thing. You have to believe, first of all, that everybody has a chance for a better life. Things that we've become accustomed to should be accessible to everybody. The other thing you have to believe in is that peace also in this region will come with economic prosperity. There's a lot of desperation that comes out of poverty. So what we do, and day by day, making people's life a little better, is probably the best contribution we can make in Egypt and many other countries to improve people's lives, and therefore make these contributions to this economic and political stability that we're all after. So running away from an issue like that is the worst thing you can do. In fact, you have to be smart how you invest, but you have to make a commitment. We're all human beings of the same race. It's important.
Vice Chairman Lee, we often talk about a G2 world that we live in today, the U.S. and China, right? And when China is going to step up to take the political weight that it deserves because of the scale of its economy and growth. But how do you see the Middle East right now? How does China see the Middle East as an investor? There is a lot of unsettled nature in the region right now, but China wants to have a role in trying to stabilize it as well as Paul is suggesting.
Okay, I will see how my view to see the Middle East. This is for China, the view, I think they are not the right person to explain about that. But from global investor point of view, I think for a global investor, right now, the Middle East, I think from long-term point of view, we see this is have big potential area, and we hope have big potential development. And the second, from global perspective to see, that is very good, very significant region linked to Africa, Europe, Asia, and also it's a very important global transfer line and hub. So therefore, for global investor like CIC, we think we really need to pay more attention to first understand this region, understand this system and the policy, and also looking for opportunity to set up partnership to help us to understand local and also to help us to do business, to do investment. So, but for China, I think it's another, from another perspective to see that China is also a developing country. I think the G2 is just according to the size, one country. But in China, the average personal GDP is only roughly $7,000 US. We have still, in the developing process, we have a lot of work to do to improve our society, improve our social fare for everybody in China. So therefore, right now, even though China, I think, have some reserves, but this is more diversified in global investment. This is, I think, this is a rational and a reasonable choice because this can help us diversify our reserve and also can help other regions, because some regions have, need more capital involved. So I think this is a very good condition for win-win structure. Thank you.
Great. Let's leave it there. Nice warm round of applause for our panelists. Jeff, Sir Suma, Mohamed, always a pleasure. Chairman Lee, it's nice to meet you finally for the first time, and I appreciate your contributions. And Paul Polman, another nice round of applause for them participating here at the forum.